and that is now being recorded. We've had a lot of people saying that they would love to see a recording of it afterwards. So the plan for today is, after I finish talking, we're going to go into the Bright Ideas for Wiltshire session, and that will be a series of local people, business people, and others, activists of all sorts, who are going to relay their suggestions for how, as a county and as a country and as a world, we can help to combat climate change. And we'll have the chat function on throughout the session, so please feel free to comment and respond. Please don't use the Q&A function, just use chat if that's okay. After that will take us through till about 12:30 or so, and then we've got Andrew Griffiths MP joining us, who is the Prime Minister's envoy for to businesses for the net zero target. So his job is to try and help businesses support the net zero ambition, and he'll be talking about that and wider climate questions, issues, and taking your questions. We'll stop for lunch, which you'll have to get for yourself, at 1 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock there'll be a new session. You'll have to click a new link, which you'll have in the email that you received, which takes us into the breakout session, and we're going to have 4 different rooms available for you to choose from, which we'll explain at the time. But that will be an hour, and that's the opportunity for everyone to speak and contribute directly. We'll then resume with another link, I'm afraid. Click a third link to get back into a main session like this, and we will then hold a panel discussion with the chairs of those breakout groups and get the feedback from all those rooms. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Claire O'Neill, former Claire Perry, who you will probably know was the MP for Devizes before me until 2019, and also formerly the president of COP26. And she'll be talking about her work and her vision for COP and for climate reduction, climate change reduction. So I think that's it in terms of the plan for the day. I'll just quickly explain where I'm coming from and why I'm doing this. I mean, I've only been the MP for a year and a bit, and I mean, I'm been hugely encouraged by the range of interest and innovation, the ideas and energy that is around climate questions in Wiltshire. And obviously, we're a beautiful rural community with centuries of expertise and experience in management of the countryside, and that seems to have fed into a really strong appetite for and concern about the wider questions about climate and environmental conservation. And that appetite is evident from today's the enthusiasm for today's meeting. I should explain that I approach this question very much as a Conservative. You know, this is a non-party issue. Obviously, today is full of people from all different political traditions. There's nothing partisan about this agenda, but different political traditions, I think, do feed into the conversation and the debate. And I think it's right for me to explain that I see environmental conservation and the reduction in carbon emissions as an inherently conservative objective, both from the word conservative, the principle of the conservation of this most wonderful environment that we've inherited in Wiltshire, this most gorgeous bit of land. I also see it as a believer in enterprise and in entrepreneurial innovation, the opportunities of the environment agenda to boost growth and to boost the sort of growth we need, a more fairly distributed and inclusive model of growth, but that will be creating jobs and creating prosperity for the country. I'm also concerned as a Conservative about security, and I think there's an important element around environmental conservation and reduction in emissions to pursue the security and maintain the security of our country. And there are obvious direct impacts of climate change, but more broadly, the impact on the world of harmful levels of emissions and the impact that will have, particularly in the global south, on security in Africa particularly, and the potential effect of that on the UK's interests. So I'm not pretending that those aren't very significant considerations, and I actually think they're very important considerations for trying to win the argument about why we need to make changes. that conservative estimates suggest that by 2050 we could have managed to displace 50 million people in Africa if we continue on the present trajectory. The impact on security in Africa is unthinkable. So even if we're just concerned about security, we should be taking this agenda very seriously. And then finally, and most profoundly, there is the essential question of justice. We owe it to the planet which hosts us and to the future generations that will come after us to ensure that our precious inheritance is maintained and preserved. And we have a fundamental moral responsibility to do that. But I should stress, I do see that moral responsibility as a difficult challenge. Justice must be implemented well, and we cannot and must not just stop the economy or try to return to the Stone Age. Human cultivation and ingenuity and capitalism itself has created the prosperity that we enjoy, and in the last half century has lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So a sustainable economy, which is what we need, requires what's called a just transition for the people and places that are currently not prospering. And we need to keep them first and foremost in our minds as we imagine the sort of change that are needed. So that's how I approach this whole question. I really do defer to the expertise of the people we're about to hear from, and I'm here to listen and to learn. We have COP26 coming up later this year. I want to be able to contribute on behalf of my constituents and Wiltshire to those conversations, and so I will be taking what we learn from today into those debates in Parliament. And I very much want this to be the beginning of a conversation that we have locally that can ensure that I'm as informed as I can be, and that I can try and amplify voices and ensure that Wiltshire gets its voice heard. So that's enough from me. I'm very pleased to go into the session with our colleagues from around the county now, particularly inspired by all of them, actually. And I've spoken to a number of them over the last year or so about their ideas. So really, really pleased with what we're going to do. 5 or 6 minutes each. Some of them have given us a question to ask you, the audience, in the form of a poll, which I'll put up on the screen as we go. Questions might occur to me that I'll just create a poll with. But anyway, here we go. Our first guest is Minette Batters, who is on the screen with me now. Hello, Minette. Thank you very much indeed for joining. You are, of course, the president of the NFU and a Wiltshire farmer, sadly not in the right bit of Wiltshire. I think you're in the Salisbury constituency, but never mind. You're very, very welcome. Obviously achieved an enormous amount, pressuring myself and others to get the agriculture bill into a decent shape last year. So I hope you're pleased with what was achieved there, and work on the environment bill as well. But we're going to hear from you about what you think we should be doing as a county and a country. Over to you.
Danny, look, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today. And I have to say, it is wonderful to be doing something on my home patch. So as Danny says, I farm in the south of Wiltshire, in John Glenn's patch, the other side of Salisbury. But I think I'm right in saying that Wiltshire has, I think, the largest landmass of any county in the country, with, of course, Salisbury Plain in the middle of the county. And what I want to touch on is a sort of, local issue, and I hope solution within my own business and the national perspective, because I'm president of the National Farmers Union of England and Wales, representing 50,000 farming and growing businesses. And the NFU made a pledge to get to carbon neutral food by 2040, so wanting to beat the government's target by 10 years. And this was really about opening doors and saying farmers are the solution in all of this. So 70% of the country is a farmed landscape. We're currently 60% self-sufficient at the moment, and a real opportunity for us to show global leadership, because agriculture is unique in that we are a source of emissions, currently 10% of UK emissions, but we are a sink, so we can do something about it. And that is the exciting part. And that ultimately is where the world needs to get to. We need to be leading a race to the top and really incentivizing the changes in food production that can happen. And there are three pillars to our thinking of getting to net zero. One is focusing effectively on farming efficiencies, never a good word to be talking about, but really that means farming on less land with less input, but achieving the same yield, or indeed achieving a bigger yield. So a better, smarter farming business, better animal health, better use of crop protection tools, and really actually delivering changes at the farm level, but also less environmental footprint, and of course producing the same high quality, affordable food, which we've all become very used to and indeed want to maintain. The second point is really sort of nature friendly solutions. So that is the more trees, the wider hedges, the capturing ever more carbon in our grasslands. And the third pillar, and all of these pillars are hugely important. You can't get to net zero without prioritizing all of these pillars. So the third one is really around carbon capture. So using a bit of the second pillar, and greenhouse gas removal from the atmosphere, as well as the bioeconomy. So driving ever greener energy. So those are the three planks of thinking. Just coming back to my farm in Wiltshire to bring it sort of back home to our roots of this conversation today. We're a mixed farming business, beef, sheep and arable. And my focus, especially since laying down, I guess, this gauntlet of lightning rod of change, has been very much focusing on progressing our farming status. So we are really fast tracking our grass on the farm. We are now using half the fertilizer that we were, just purely because we are using herbal lays, we're using clover. So we are locking down nitrogen and carbon into those soils. I run a wedding business as well, and I'm very conscious that a wedding is not a very climate friendly thing to be doing. In many cases, people come from all over the country in many different parts of the world. So we're making a commitment that every wedding can plant a tree, because this is, I think, the big ticket for me. It is all very well making the changes at farm level, but we all need to make changes to our lives if we are going to get to the carbon neutral position. And this is why I believe so passionately and so strongly that this is the decade of farmers. This is the decade of agriculture, because our will to keep pulling things out of the inner earth, to be taking out finite resources that are irreplaceable, is unsustainable and is leading to a lot of the problems that we have right now. So we have to grow things in an ever more sustainable way on the earth. And many of you, when you're out walking, you will see hedges, trees, all planted with those plastic coatings that stay there and gradually degrade over the years. We have the ability now to use things like sheep's wool to make tree guards. I've got tomato growers who are now using the whole of the vine to make the packaging, so totally biodegradable. Latex that can be made out of milkweed. I mean, just a very, very exciting time if we get this right. So all I want to do is just make the case, Danny, that it's not just about trees. There's a whole load of green growth. Danny talked about the green economy and the opportunities for us. This is what it's about. And I really think that agriculture and farmers offer a lot of those solutions. So that's a whirlwind trip through 6 minutes, very hard to cram in what's needed. But thank you for the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you so much, Minette. That's tremendous. Can I just ask you what you think the appetite is among farmers? I know you represent them, so you've got to tell us they're all marvelously, wonderfully pro-environment and want to save the planet. But I mean, genuinely, how easy do you think it's going to be to make the case to farmers, whether landowners or tenants, that these are opportunities for them and that this is the way to go?
I mean, the really exciting thing is all the things that I talked about, the three pillars of thinking, are really good for the farming business. They're good for the environment and they're good for the end consumer too. So it's a win-win, which is always the best place to start from. So I've been really impressed about how farmers right across the country are really up for this challenge. They want to pitch themselves as part of the solution. And of course, having left the EU, we've moving into a new policy arena. So there is a real opportunity. You can deliver the vast amount of net zero through policy incentives. And we have the chance to do that. And I think knowing where the deficit is right now, the challenges the economy faces, we've got to make sure that the future really stacks up for the public purse and 70% of the country. I think we tend to focus on this sort of north-south divide. You know, for me, it's about leveling up everywhere and making sure that farmers are, you know, really playing their part, I guess, and they're up for it. I've been really impressed with how farmers want to take this forwards.
Okay. And thank you. And last two quick questions I'll put together. One, somebody's raised the question: did you mean one tree planted per wedding? I mean, how many weddings do you do, and how long is it going to take to make a wood? Is it one per wedding guest? Perhaps you meant. And second question is: what do you think about the calls for reduction of meat in our diets? Some people think we need to be cutting out, if not all, quite a lot of meat. What's your view on that?
Well, on trees, look, I want to plant as many trees as we can. So I can't mandate the wedding to plant a tree, but I think a lot of people would like to. And I think it brings greater meaning and understanding to all of our footprints. So a big commitment on trees. On meat and a diet, I think this has been a very, very challenging, and if I'm honest, confusing debate, actually, Danny. It is about a healthy, balanced diet. Meat and dairy are part of a healthy, balanced diet. We all need to eat more fruit and vegetables and pulses in our diet. That is what every single age group is missing. But in the UK here, we have a fantastic maritime climate that many parts of the world don't have, whereby we grow grass and we can grow other things that other parts of the world really struggle to grow because of challenges on water security. So what we should do is to prioritize those areas of the world where we can grow meat on an extensive basis and not be feeding the world's grain to it. Again, box tick for here. And make sure that it is part of that balanced diet. I think, you know, I guess my big plus over COVID and seeing how people have met the challenges, people have been getting to back to cooking from scratch, to cooking whole foods, to having less processed foods, and that's what we want to see. People cooking from scratch, really valuing their food, entering the food waste challenge that we have, and valuing meat as part of a healthy, balanced diet. We're so lucky here that we have the climate to produce it on an extensive grass-based system the bulk of the time.
Tremendous, very good. Well, I've just launched a poll on that very question, which I've done it very unfairly in a way that you don't think is a fair question. But I asked the question: should we reduce our meat eating? And the result is, I don't know if you can all see that. Can you see that?
A unanimous yes.
I'm afraid largely unanimous yes, but I appreciate the question's a bit too simplistic for you. Minette, that's great. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been very good to have you with us today, and look forward to further conversations ahead. Very many thanks.
Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Great. Right. Next up is my friend and rival, Emma Dorney, who stood against me as the Green Party candidate in the election in 2019, but isn't all bad. And I'm very, very pleased that she's able to speak to us. I think in your own capacity rather than the Green Party. Is that right, Emma?
Yes, that's right. Yes, yes.
But very much look forward to your thoughts. So please go ahead.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Danny, for organising this and for inviting me along. Now, I'm just seeing if I can share my screen here. Yes. Come on, you're going to start there. So I'm going to start very quickly going from the global level down to the local level, and then discuss sort of Wiltshire. So globally, you know, we know that temperatures have been shooting up the last 2,000 years. And carbon dioxide levels have also been shooting up, despite the fact, you know, for the last 30 years we've known about this problem, they're still shooting up. This is what scientists have been modelling. Business as usual is going to get us to 4 degrees warming at the end of the century. If we rein back our emissions, you know, we can keep to much lower levels. Just a quick word of warning about this, that the scientists only model what they actually understand. So there's things like melting the permafrost aren't included. So the heating could be worse than the models. Going back to this graph, where are we now? This was obviously predicted in 2005. Where we are now is worse than what they thought we would be in 2005. So yeah, what does it mean for devices in particular? If we had 4 degrees of warming, our hottest day would be 6 degrees hotter each year. And in the summer months, you get more than half of the time we would have days over 25 degrees. So I don't know what this does for our crop yields and food provision, but I know people are very worried about whether we could feed ourselves. So how can we keep to safe levels? Well, from the Paris Agreement, you can calculate roughly that as a whole of the Earth, we can emit 700 billion more tons of carbon dioxide. If you work that out as a sort of fair budget per person, you get to 45 tons of carbon dioxide per person. And Wiltshire's about 500,000, so you get to about 23 million tons of carbon dioxide for Wiltshire, for the Wiltshire Council area. So if you look at what we're emitting now, you work out that we would completely use up this budget in the next 7 years. This is actually, quite terrifying. It's very, very soon. So there's only a limited amount of carbon dioxide we can safely emit. How can we use this budget? Well, here, just as a sort of thought process, I've said, well, let's say out of this 23 million tons, let's have 1/3 of it on sort of public projects and 1/3 of it for private, which gives us 30 tons a person. And comparing this to current carbon footprints, you see, a car is sort of 10 tons. I mean, you can use up this 30 tons really quickly. Likewise, for public spending, I think we're meant to be building 44,000 new houses in Wiltshire. Well, that would be 1.4 million tons out of the 7.5 million tons. The incinerator, some predictions are nearly 3 million tons. Stonehenge Tunnel, also huge. Is this how we want to spend our carbon budget? So can we increase this budget? Well, possibly, but I say let's not rely on it. Let's get it in the bag first, because some of these technologies, they're unproven. Let's do it, absolutely, but don't count it until we've done it. So how can we reduce and stop emitting carbon? Well, the really good thing is that almost all of this we can stop. So as we've just heard, it's fantastic to hear that with food, perhaps we can get to zero by 2040. With production lines, we can get to zero carbon production lines by having renewable energy and green steel. So we can do it. We know how to do it. But to do it, the zero carbon option has got to be the cheapest and easiest and most obvious, because most people can't afford more expensive options and businesses won't be competitive. So we need regulations, we need taxes and subsidies. Of course, with taxes, we've got to take everybody with us. So you can't just put huge taxes up, because then people there'll be an outcry. Internationally, we need to make sure that we don't stop people from adopting environmental friendly regulations with the World Trade Organization and things. And at Wiltshire Council level, we can look at planning. I'd love to see zero specifications that all housing should be zero carbon, or even it can be carbon negative. However, Wiltshire Council says this is difficult and it has to be done nationally. We need to sort this. So quick word about the science and the economics. The science is there's only a certain amount of carbon dioxide we can safely emit ever. And also we have a certain number of people to do things, build things, to make this transition to a sustainable economy. The economics, money is not a limitation. We can find the money. We do in war times when we need to. We can find it. So let's be limited by that.
Emma, I'm going to get you to.
Okay, so finally, there's only a finite of carbon dioxide. We've got the technologies to get there. We've got to work together to get the right policies to make sure that we can do it. Thank you.
Tremendous, Emma. Thank you very much indeed. I've just launched a poll with the questions that you asked. It's always a bit unfair when you say give a both option. Go on, someone say individuals and businesses acting alone. That's not getting a lot of. I
think what I might add is that I'll put a link to my slides up. So I've now raced through them. I'll put a link up on the chat so that if anybody wants to look at them in more detail, they can have them.
Okay, fantastic. I'm going to end the poll here and share the results as expected. people think it's both.
Mhm.
Emma, thank you. I remember on the hustings in the election saying there's no magic money tree, but that was in 2019, and so it turns out there was one. So I take your argument there, but I'm very grateful for everything you've contributed, and thank you very much indeed. We will leave it there. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you.
Great. Next up is Joe Brindle, who's a hero of mine. Sorry, removing the poll. There we go. Have we got Joe? We need your face and voice, Joe, if you can. There you go. Nice to see you. So Joe is a Devizes resident, and in addition to his work, which we're about to hear about on climate education, he's been absolutely inspirational during COVID, and just worth mention to him for work he's done. It was part of the church that he belongs to in Devizes, organising the COVID support group, and brought together hundreds of people with others, obviously, to organise a really brilliant service, which has been an inspiration to me. So, but I'm not sure what I think about his environment ideas. Let's hear them. Joe, over to you.
Great. Thanks for the intro. So yeah, I'm Joe. I'm 18. I left Devizes sixth form last year, and I'm currently on a gap year. So I didn't actually do my exams, obviously, because they were cancelled, but I did my A-levels in biology, chemistry, and history. And at the end of this year, I'm going to Sheffield University to study politics and international relations. I've been involved in climate campaigning for since 2019 now. I was involved in the climate strikes and organised the big national climate strike in September 2019, which was the largest climate mobilisation in UK history. So that was really awesome to be part of that. And I've also started a campaign called Teach the Future, and we're calling for better climate education. That's what I'm talking about now. So we know that many of the effects of global heating are now inevitable. So like obviously, whilst reducing emissions can prevent the worst of those and can reduce the severity of them, young people like myself will undoubtedly experience many of the effects in our lives, from less reliable harvests to increasing risks of pandemics. I think that the purpose of education is to prepare and equip young people for their adult lives and for their futures. And as my adult life is going to be so heavily affected by climate change, I think that my education should have prepared me to adapt to that future that climate change presents. Unfortunately, it failed to do this, and I'm not the only one. So despite 14 years of generally good quality education, Devizes School is a great school, it fell to me to teach myself the basics of climate change. And, it wasn't until about 2 years ago that I discovered that climate change was happening right now. And the little that I was taught in school led me to believe that it was a far off and distant threat for future generations, which we know isn't the case. You'd think that having chosen 3 A-level subjects with distinct links to climate change, I would have covered it extensively, but unfortunately not. I only had one lesson on climate change during my A-levels, a chemistry lesson, when we were told that CO2 molecules absorb infrared energy. That's pretty much it. So teaching on climate change is minimal here in England. Mandatory climate education is isolated to geography, which is an optional subject after year 8 or 9, and a little bit in science. And the topic is covered purely as a scientific phenomenon. There's nothing on its root causes, the societal impacts, or the solutions to it, which, if anything, I think those 3 parts are the most impactful and most important bits for us to be taught about. So the Department for Education argues that teachers can cover more about climate change if they want to, but 75% feel they haven't received adequate training to educate students on this, and most teachers won't choose to add more to an already demanding and exam-focused curriculum. Looking back at my education, I now realise that some of the limited things I was taught about were incorrect. Often these came from outdated resources that confused the hole in the ozone layer, which is no longer a major problem, with global heating, which is very much still a major problem. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming my lovely teachers or the great school, because the problem isn't just isolated to Devizes, to the small pocket of Wiltshire. We did a survey of 2,990 pupils across England and found that only 4% of them felt they knew a lot about climate change in the environment. So it's clear there that the problem is with the English education system as a whole, not with individual schools. And to make matters worse, I'm concerned that with subjects stripped down to the very basics during this pandemic, seemingly unessential content like climate change may have been cast away for the time being, which means that our response to this major crisis may hamper young people's abilities to respond to future ones. The good news is that there is a clear solution to this in my mind. So in Teach the Future, the campaign that I started and I'm now working for full time, we've researched, engaged with academics and experienced educators, and here's what we think needs to happen. Once schools return to normal, the government needs to start a national programme of climate education. The Department for Education should work to upskill teachers so they're confident in teaching about climate change in a way that empowers students. Every school should have an assigned climate champion, a senior member of staff to ensure good teaching and learning on climate change. And most importantly, climate change and sustainable principles need to be woven throughout the curriculum and throughout education like a golden thread. In history, we could learn about how fossil fuel development over time and how this links to our Britain's industrial revolution. In English, we could read work from people who have experienced climate change firsthand. And in design and technology, design briefs could have a focus on sustainable materials. There is so much potential across the whole of the curriculum to ensure that every student, whatever subjects they study, leaves education with the right skills and knowledge to find secure, future-fit work in the green economy. Young people like myself really, really want to create a better and fairer world, but we need good climate education to unleash our potential. Thank you.
Joe, great. Thank you very much indeed. That is tremendous. Well, as you can see, you can't see because only I can see what's going on in the poll that I just launched, but you won't be surprised to hear people are agreeing with you, and the chat has done so overwhelmingly. So it falls to me to challenge you. I mean, I get the point that that at the moment climate's only covered in geography and a bit in science, and it's treated very much as a scientific phenomenon. And what you're asking for is for it to be treated as what we think it is, which is a holistic challenge that has multiple causes, and that these need to be taught to young people, and also presumably what can be done about it and should be done about it. Do you not see that these are essentially political questions? And what children need to learn in school is the foundations on which they can then construct their political opinions. Do we really want teachers to be telling young people what are still quite contested opinions or alternative perspectives on what might be happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely a difficult one. There are certainly some areas of contention, I guess, some areas where people aren't sure on climate change, but there's also a lot of areas where there is huge scientific consensus, but we're not being taught about them still. So there's certainly things that need to be taught there. I think part of this is about the right skills and knowledge for the future. It's about equipping us for the right jobs. So there's certainly an element about vocational courses here, which are really lagging behind, particularly apprenticeships at the moment, just really aren't giving people kind of green skills that they need. And that's something that's lacking. Minette was talking about how some farmers are doing some great work on things like carbon sequestration and things like that. I think there's a huge potential for that to be part of courses on farming, agriculture and that kind of thing, but it's not currently, as far as I'm aware. But I think on the political matters, I think debates should be pitched as debates to students. So I don't think teachers should be telling students, what to think politically. But I think that's quite normal to happen in education. We learn about various different ethical issues in RS, for example, or PSHE, and we learn both sides of the argument and come to our own informed decisions. I think education should be giving us the facts, and then we can come to our decisions from that.
Tremendous. Well, listen, I successfully triggered the audience by suggesting that the science was contested, and we've had some responses. So I take it very well put, Joe, and I completely agree. And of course, you're right that we involve young people in debates around all sorts of questions, and fundamentally we are talking about science, which is largely agreed. So well said. Thank you. Here's the results of the poll. I honour those two people who said that we should not include climate education in the national curriculum for their contrarian views. That is what we need. So, Joe, you and I will continue to talk about this, and I will continue to push, as we've discussed.
Someone suggested that I'm the next MP for devisers, Danny. So watch out.
Well, yeah, that's my darkest fear. So, Joe, you've done a great job so far with the COVID stuff, but also with this agenda, and I'm really keen to try and help you. So we will keep talking, and I hope to work together. Great. Well, listen, thank you very much, Joe. I'll stop sharing that slide, and let you go back to the audience. And then we have next up General Nugee, I hope. Yes, there is. Richard, you're very welcome. Richard is the Climate Change and Sustainability Strategy Lead for the MOD. So he has a national remit, but is also a Wiltshireman and is here to talk to us about what the Army can and should be doing to play its part in climate change reduction. Over to you, Richard.
Danny, thank you very much indeed. And as you say, I have a national and actually to some extent an international with NATO and other countries, trying to persuade them that actually militaries must do more in this space. And that's been my sort of focus over the last year or so, is to try and persuade the world's militaries, but our own military as well, that there are two sides to this, the effect of defence on climate change, how can we reduce our own emissions, but also the effect of climate change on defence, how can we operate in a completely climate changed world, because as has been sort of intimated, we've already locked in the climate change environment of 2030, and we're well on our way to locking in something that looks rather worse in 2050. So I'll keep this very local, but we can have an effect on the training area. Obviously, Salisbury Plain is a huge part of Wiltshire, as you've heard, which is our primary training area. The effect on our people, if you like, and what we do, and how we operate in Wiltshire. So if I start with the training area, there's numerous aspects of this. So the first is our equipment. What are we doing in terms of our equipment? Well, we've already introduced hybrid vehicles in the Army and to try and reduce emissions, so that they're not yet fully green energy propulsed, but actually what we're trying to do is get to a stage where we have green energy for all our vehicles. That will be extremely difficult and it will take a long time, but we can get there, we believe. So we're looking at hybrid vehicles, we're looking at different types of vehicles. So if we make things much smaller, if we take the person out of the vehicle, then actually what we can do is perhaps make it much more accessible to renewable energies. You will have noticed that we have quite a lot of aircraft flying over, whether it's Chinooks, as went over my house yesterday, or others in the Wiltshire area. We've already signed a protocol to say that 50% of our aviation fuel will be synthetic in time. And I believe, and I've been told that we can make that 100%. That's synthetic fuels that have come from green resources rather than fossil fuels. And so we will not be giving any more carbon to the environment. So that's our equipment on the training area, just making it less emitting. Greater resilience through our buildings. We've built in West End Camp, just by Tilshead, the first of our net zero buildings. Modular, built at 9 weeks on site to build completely net zero. We've improved that so that new buildings going up near Shropshire actually are now negative. They give back to the grid and they create no emissions at all. And that's the standard that I have laid out that we want to try and create across all our buildings over time. As we build new builds, they should be at net zero. As we replace and refurbish our buildings, we should be trying to get to net zero on all our buildings. And we own some ridiculous number of buildings. We need to get rid of some, we need to knock down some, but it's in nearly 100,000 buildings we own across the country. We are building solar farms in Wiltshire. We've got solar farms going up in order to try and create green energy sources for the electricity that we need. So around RAF Lynham, we've got a solar farm going up. And there are other opportunities, perhaps hydrogen, perhaps thermal, ways that we're looking at using our land to improve our built estate. And then the final one in the last couple of minutes is it goes very much back to what Minette was talking about, environment, biodiversity and sequestration of our land. We own or are responsible for 2% of the UK land mass, 440,000 hectares. And we need to make that the most environmentally sustainable, the most biodiverse and the most sequestering, i.e. capturing carbon that we possibly can. So we're doing a natural capital audit of all MOD land. We're working to replace lost woodland and standard trees, and we've got a plan to plant 2 million trees across the country in the next 5 years. And we have intents to go further than that over the years after that. If you go to a normal camp, you'll see lots and lots of mown grass. But we've introduced and are introducing a no-mow policy and trying to create all that grassland as meadow, which will improve the biodiversity. And we have a plan for masonry bees going into almost all our bases, or that's the intent. We're not there anything like yet. Small woodland planting on our bases so that actually we start little woods in all our bases. We own a lot of land. Let's use it for that. Allowing woody debris, building ponds and so on in our bases in Wiltshire, and trying to do the same on Salisbury Plain where we can. We're part of the Queen's Great Green Canopy for the Platinum Anniversary. What we're trying to do there is link all parts of the MOD land across the country in a much better state for trees. And finally, we're working with our tenants. We have lots of farming tenants. We're working with our tenants to try and make sure that their grazing techniques, their soil structures, the diversity that they have on their farms is all improved so that we can sequester. Now, I'd finish with, I have done the maths, and we've worked out that we think we can get the MOD to net zero, scope 1, scope 2 by 2050. I don't think we can do it much before that. And a lot of people will say that's not fast enough. But the very fact that we reckon we can get to net zero relies on sequestering as much carbon as we can in the land. Salisbury Plain is a huge carbon sink if we use it as such, and if we plan it as such, and that's our intent. Danny, I'll stop there.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. I've just stuck up the poll based on those three priorities. Very, very encouraging to hear much of what you've said. Can you just quickly, in a sentence or so, we have almost out of time, how high on the radar of defence ministers and the chiefs in London is climate change as a global security issue? If your principal job, keeping us safe and making the world more peaceful, how much does climate change factor in those debates?
So it's a significant part of the integrated review, which is the integrated defence and security review that is coming out hopefully shortly. It is absolutely at the forefront of what the Secretary of State took at the Defence Board just recently, and other ministers. I'm meeting ministers on a very regular basis, so I think it's up there. And the security, obviously, I mean, I could wax lyrical. I didn't because it's a local, but I could wax lyrical about security and climate change and how that is going right up the agenda. And the Prime Minister's talking about it at the UN Security Council at his meeting when he talks as the president of the United Nations Security Council. We've got planned meetings throughout the year before COP26 to make sure that actually climate and security is a key part of trying to bring the world together, that actually if a country is at war or is in conflict, it's adding to the problems and it's not trying to solve the problems. It's a double whammy. So we need to try and maintain peace and security in order to be able to tackle climate change.
Very much appreciate it. Thank you, Richard. That is encouraging, and it's been very good to have you with us. There's the results. The poll is fairly evenly balanced among your three priorities, which is interesting. Very good. I wish we could talk to you about grazing on Salisbury Plain, which is an issue for some local farmers, but there's no time. So thank you very much indeed, Richard. Right, another Richard is up now, Richard Kluwer, to come on video, I hope. Oh, did I share the results of that? No, it looks like I didn't. Sorry, there's the results for that last poll. Richard, very welcome. You're very welcome. Deputy Leader of Wiltshire Council and the lead on sustainability and climate change, I think. Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Something like that. I will hand over to you now, Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen and hitting an instant technical problem as I can't seem to find the PowerPoint presentation to share. I gather we've sent you a copy. I don't know if it's possible for someone at your end to share that.
Rebecca, no doubt, can try and.
I will start at least talking, and if it's possible to share it, that would be marvelous. Before I start, I think one fact is probably worth bearing in mind. If you look at the UK over the last decade, we have reduced our carbon emissions as the United Kingdom by 29%, while growing the economy by about 20%, and that doesn't include the effect of COVID, which will have had, I suspect, a significant impact on carbon reduction, albeit potentially a temporary one. So this is definitely something that can be achieved, and can be achieved in a way that makes economic sense and environmental sense, and benefits all round. What are we doing as Wiltshire? We acknowledged that there was a climate emergency as full council 2 years ago now. And from that, we have then proceeded to look at, sorry, if I can control that screen, yeah, thanks. We have then proceeded to look at our own, how we are going to address the issues of climate change as a council. If we come on perhaps to the next slide, please. So what are we doing? Sorry, we've jumped, I think, one slide too far now. I do apologise, this is, thanks. As a council, we have committed to become carbon neutral as a corporate entity by 2030. I'm convinced that's achievable. We've already cut our carbon footprint by 80% since 2014, the bulk of that in the last 2 years. We're investing £50 million in our own council housing stock. The aim of that is to bring all of our council housing stock up to an EPC B rating inside the next 10 years. One of the reasons we're doing that is we want to lead the way. If you try and retrofit a property at the moment, it is extremely difficult to find people who can come in and do it and who have any form of capacity whatsoever. To get, as was mentioned earlier, apprenticeships built up that will give us the kind of skills that are needed to look at significant retrofitting of properties, we need to have some form of program in place that companies can invest in, that we can offer that continual stream of retrofitting and development. So we thought we'd start the way on that. We've got 5,300 and something properties, and so we will be putting a lot of effort, a lot of our own funding into that, and that's entirely funded through the housing revenue account. It also, really importantly, saves those residents £500 to £600 a year on their energy bills. And given that we are providing housing to some of the most vulnerable residents in Wiltshire, that's critical. We're getting funding from government to help with that, £500,000 to look at the 100 worst properties and get them probably to a better standard than EPCB. We've got our own carbon reduction problems in place on our own estate. We're looking at funding from government to help with dealing with things like the heating of swimming pools, which is extremely hard to put a financial case for putting the air source heat pumps in. They don't pay for themselves, but with a bit of government funding, that can be done as well to address that last 20% of our council emissions. If we jump onto the next slide, we are looking at other issues around the wider environment. So we have a blue-green infrastructure strategy being developed. That's running sort of in conjunction with the local plan. So that will look at what we can do, where we can sensibly be planting trees. Planting trees is great, but we need to bear in mind we also have some of the world's only, or a large chunk of the world's chalk downland, for example, that we don't want to be destroying that habitat by planting trees on it when it's a critical habitat with some very protected species on it. We're looking at improving wildflower trial, wildflowers on our verges, and wherever we can find bits of ground that can safely not be cut or cut in a different way to promote wildflowers rewilding across the highways infrastructure, for example. Converting streetlights to LEDs. Again, that will both save money and save carbon, and that's the kind of approach that we as a council are trying to take. We've got the Salisbury River Park scheme, which is a combination of flood improvements, but also trying to get a bit more of a green corridor running through Salisbury. Again, if we jump to the next slide. As a county, data is difficult. Scatter, which is the most commonly used data source, is very urban in nature, doesn't give us a good breakdown on agriculture, but broadly, Wiltshire's carbon emissions break down as shown on the graph there. So transport's the big one, and then homes and industry and commercial activity, agriculture and the public sectors, the relatively equal in percentages. Again, if we jump on, please. As a council, we want to get a climate change strategy put together as well for the county. I'd hoped to have that out coming to full council next week. Sadly, COVID has got in the way. We've not been able to progress that. To make a strategy, it's got to be consulted on in a formal process. And it's got to go through a process that we just didn't have the staffing capacity, certainly earlier, later last year, to put into. I would now expect that consultation will start hopefully June, and we will aim to have a climate change strategy approved by the newly elected Wiltshire Council come the autumn of next year. And that would be the next phase, is looking at how we work with the other bodies inside Wiltshire, with residents, with everyone, how we bring in the expertise from universities, how we come up with ways and work with government to reduce carbon emissions across the board. One important issue has been mentioned, the local plan. We would love to be putting forward a local plan that said we had zero carbon housing. It does require changes with central government there, but we are working closely both with our MPs, but also through the County Council network, through the climate change element or the rural element of UK 100, to lobby government and to put forward the views of rural authorities, because our issues are different. We can generate more energy, but we have different transport needs than those in an urban area. And what we have got to make sure that we adapt to climate change in a way that doesn't damage the economy of Wiltshire at the same time. We've got to get that synergy. We've got to be making all the elements there working together, which can definitely be done, but need to be done in a slightly different way in more rural areas.
Richard, we're going to need to wrap up in a
sorry,
moment.
yeah, jump onto the last. I think we're on the last slide after this one. We've got the top priorities from Wiltshire from our latest discussions with area boards, which show climate change is there at the top of the list. And then there's one last slide. So we've got the climate change strategy being put forward. Please engage with that when it comes out. It will shape a document that will be used to drive carbon reduction over the course of the next 8 years inside the county. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much. I'm afraid we are out of time. Just a very quick question. There's been loads of engagement on the chat, which basically is saying, can you go faster and do more? So I think we might send you the transcript and get some responses for you if that's okay. I mean, it's very helpful suggestions. Can I just quick the Green Homes Grant, is that on your radar? That seems to have been particularly problematic as a means of getting money into people to do retrofitting and
yeah.
Where are you?
It is on our radar. I have to be honest, if I look at the response of COVID, government has been very good at getting funding forward and not so good at getting funding spent. Local councils seem to have been better at getting funding spent. So the Green Homes Grant has not worked as well as we would have liked. There seem to be issues with payments. I don't know what those are. They're not something that the council is involved with. I think the more we can do to funnel the broader good government good ideas down to authorities across the country to then focus on the delivery element. We pick up bins. If we don't pick up bins, people get really cross. We know that delivery is important. I think that would be a good way to handle those sort of issues personally, because at the moment that it's stultifying the growth of the sector that we are going to need to retrofit everyone's house.
Tremendous. Richard, thank you very much indeed. I very much agree about the need to localise spending and responsibility more. Thank you for your time, and we'll get the queries to you. Right, oh, hang on, I had a poll for you as well. Poll, let's quickly see what that was, sorry. What did you ask? Is Wiltshire doing a brilliant job? Probably. Yes or yes. Oh, actually, this is worth quick. While I introduce the next question, you've asked whether people are whether people think that residents are committed and businesses are committed. It's quite an interesting.
We're always gathering data.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give 20 seconds for people to try and quickly answer what they think about their fellow residents and local businesses. Next up, we'll introduce, as we're doing the poll, is Tim Wade, who is a local farmer and has been in correspondence with me over the last year about all that he's doing and things that should be done. And he has some questions and challenges to pose to us all for this agenda. So we're going to bring, he's ready to go. I'm going to end that poll. Thank you, everybody. And I will share the results there. I hope that's now visible. Tim, you need to come on video, please. And interesting there.
Unmute myself.
Unmute yourself. Thank you very much. Right. Okay, and I'm afraid to tell you, Tim, we're going to have to be pretty speedy with this one. I'm going to keep you closely to time, 5 minutes, and then we'll stop. But over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Let me say thank you, Danny. I think I've probably been awarded the poison chalice here. So the world is warming, and what are we going to do about it? And this leads us to net zero as today's project. And with any project, and net zero is a huge project, we need to judge the benefits against the costs. And my piece is to try and find the costs, but I hasten to say not to form any judgments around that. I'm not an expert, I just look for the answers. Specifically, what were the macro costs? What are the tangible costs to you and I, and how it all get paid for? So firstly, I read the 10-point plan, which was devoid of discussions about costs, which was a bit worrying. But as it happened, there was a Freedom of Information request, not by me, asking the same question, and the government refused to provide the information. The Information Commissioner subsequently found in favour of the request, but I'm not aware that there's been any response since. This begs the question of, does the government know what this is going to cost, or does it know and it fears to tell us? Anyway, that left me to cast around elsewhere. So I looked at macro costs. The first one that came to hand was that Philip Hammond wrote to from the Treasury to Mrs. May following her net zero bill, saying the expected cost of net zero would be £1 trillion. That's 10 to the power 12 to those who do arithmetic. And if you want to convert that into something more meaningful, it equates to roughly 670,000 additional teachers each and every year from now to 2050. Professor Hughes, Edinburgh, suggests that it will cost £3 trillion. That's 3 times what Hammond was saying, merely for electricity, housing, and private transport. The National Grid was reported in the FT as saying it would cost us 150 billion each year to 2050. And on a global basis, Longbold estimated the cost to be $250 trillion, about 5.4% of global GDP. These are large sums, and they come with some non-numerate comments that I picked up on the way past. So those costs would lead to pressure on living standards for the increased cost of goods and services because of higher energy prices and increased property prices. Onward, which is a think tank, argued that there would probably be 10 million jobs put at risk, and a lot of these would be behind the red wall, which of course, as a Tory, is important in voting terms. High energy prices would lead to imports and reallocation of production facilities. Grant boilers here in Devizes might find themselves at risk. They make excellent oil-fired boilers. The chief executive of Vauxhall said that unless you could have a subsidy, he thought he might have to lay off 1,100 workers. And Hammond also said that you can't spend it twice. You can spend it on this, or you can have public services, but you can't have both. Further comment was that we would find ourselves at a competitive disadvantage. And the carbon tax on imports, which is being discussed, simply proves that that is the case. But the tax, of course, leads to a higher cost of living. Some more tangible sort of home examples. The Labour Party, taking information from the Climate Change Committee, estimated that house insulation cost £26,300 per home, and a remarkably accurate figure. And if you live in an old small home, you'll probably find it's even smaller by the time you've done that. And potentially there's a 46k charge per household, and there are millions of households, by the time you've included the cost of heat pumps and higher energy costs. Heat pumps of themselves cost 10 to 15,000, including any necessary modifications. Andrew Montford claimed that the annual cost of motoring as we shift to electric would rise from £3,500 a year to £6,700. At a household level, we already pay about £500 in green surcharges, and these are expected to at least double. An acquaintance of mine, who's a very eminent engineer, did the sums and decided that if he changed from gas to electric, it would cost him £4,500 more per annum. So this is a worthy cause, but somebody has to pay for it. And the answer to that, I think, is you are going to pay for it, your children will pay for it, and your grandchildren will pay for it, either from your own bank account or in direct taxation in order to fund subsidies, or in stealth taxes represented, for instance, by higher electricity prices. And we can be reasonably sure that in the future that will have to be paid for by the next generation. And Danny, if you're desperate for time, I thank you for your attention and hand back to you.
Well, very good. Thank you very much, Tim. Well, I was keen to hear from you, given the correspondence we've had, and recognise your real concern around this. As I said in my opening remarks, I think we've got to achieve what's called a just transition to a greener future, one that doesn't penalise people, especially those on low incomes. But how we do it and what the considerations are is exactly what we're here to discuss. You won't be surprised to hear much of the comments has been suggesting that we should be less concerned about wealth and more about the future of the planet, which is ultimately the source of our wealth and prosperity. But we very much appreciate your research, Tim, that's led to your presentation, and thank you very much indeed for contributing, and you've added to our debate. So thank you, Tim. Going to move on now to Louisa Davison from the Climate Change Lobby. Have we got Louisa? Yes.
Yes.
Great. Hello. Can't
Hi.
see you. There you are. Tremendous. Over to you, Louisa.
Thank you, Danny. It's interesting, actually, that I should follow Tim and his concern of the cost of tackling climate change. So, as Danny said, I'm Louisa Davison. I'm on the steering committee of Citizens Climate Lobby UK, but I'm also Wiltshire born and bred. And even though Citizens Climate Lobby is a global movement, we have groups across all the inhabited continents now. We're very much about grassroots and working at a local level and working with our elected representatives such as Danny. And we built up a pretty good relationship with Claire O'Neill, obviously Danny's predecessor. And we began the same process with Danny. And last year, we took part in the Time Is Now Mass Lobby Day. I'm just going to start some slides now, so you don't just have to look at me. Here we go. I hope you can see the Time Is Now slide. So I'm sure many people here took part in that. And Danny was very honest, I seem to remember, and said, as he has been today, and said, I don't know much about this. It's really not my priority that I came in and became a constituency MP. But the important thing that he was open and at this climate summit. And I think that says a lot about how far you can get if you have a good working relationship with your MP. So at Citizens Climate Lobby, we're all about relationships, we're all about working together. And we believe that we can only tackle climate change if we work together and leave our personal politics behind and try not to get into the weeds with political ideologies. So this is something that devises, we felt we played a part in with our devices group. And I know Brian Matthews is here today. He's on the front there with a stick. And behind him is Dave Waltham, Professor Dave Waltham, who after the initial climate emergency proposal was rejected by Wiltshire Council in 2017, they went back just a few months later, and Dave worked with councillors behind the scenes to both bills were passed, and that's cross-party cooperation for you. So, what we're not just an organisation that calls for action and say just do something, because I mentioned in the chat earlier that climate change is a fact. Let's not get away with it. Climate change is an absolute fact. At least 97% of scientists agree that human-related climate change is a fact. What is hotly disputed is what to do about it, the best way to do this. And in answer to Tim's concerns and other people's concerns about how this is going to be paid for, we have a really good policy to help deal with this. And it's called, or we call it, climate income. It's also known as carbon fee and dividend. And it's on the surface, it's really simple, but with all great things, it's simple to explain. And then there's lots of complexity behind it. It starts off with the carbon fee, where when fossil fuels are imported or into the UK or extracted in there's a fee placed on it. Sorry?
I think it might be worth you switching off your video because you're glitching a lot, and it might.
Okay, will do.
Video, thanks.
That's rural broadband for you.
But you'll need to share your screen again. We've now lost that.
Okay, can you see me now?
That's better. Well, no, I'm afraid we can't see, we can't see your screen anymore.
It says the host has stopped my video.
Ah.
If you could restart my video for me.
Rebecca can get that going again. Oh dear, I might have things up.
The joys of Zoom.
Yes, it's been going so well.
Okay, I'm back.
You're back. I don't have your video, so try that again. Let's go back as we were.
I'm not gonna share because rural broadband, I can't even pronounce it. Rural broadband is a bit of an issue. Yes, so fees placed on fossil fuels, and then the money is given back equally to UK households. So it kind of pays for itself. So what it does is it raises the cost of fossil fuels. It makes them obsolete, basically. We aim to make them obsolete. It makes clean energy cheaper, and it also protects the most vulnerable while the cost of fossil fuels go up, because there was no getting away from it. We need to move away from fossil fuels because they are generating the majority of greenhouse gas emissions. So like I say, we like to work on a local level. So if you would like to join us in our advisors area, I know many of you know me and some of you are also members as well, then please contact me. Go visit our website, which is citizensclimatelobby.co.uk, no .co. And I'm Louisa at the same address. Thank you for having me here, Danny.
Thank you very much indeed, Louise. Well, we've been in touch over the last year or so a lot about this proposal, and as you know, I've been trying to get an answer out of Treasury and the Business Department about why they won't pursue it. Of course, they, you've shared the long letter they wrote back explaining that they have other plans, which I think is, to be honest, the main reason. It's not an objection to the policy itself, but that isn't quite good enough. So I will continue to advocate for consideration of this very ambitious and, as you say, simple to communicate, but no doubt difficult in detail proposal. And it's the kind of idea we need.
It's probably worth adding that was on one of my slides that the Canadian government had this as their backstop carbon tax, and they won an election off the back of it. The opposition party in Canada went in saying we don't want this tax. The Justin Trudeau's government said we do want this tax, and they won their election. Yeah. So it is possible.
Great. Well, there's a poll going on now with the questions that you suggested around individual action, government action, or worldwide agreements. Let me give that 10 seconds to conclude. There we go. And government cross-party parliamentary activity has won that poll. Great. Okay, well, Louisa, thank you very much indeed. We will stay in touch. All the best. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more talks, which is supposed to happen in the next, and I'll do them in the next 20 minutes. Juliet, are you with us? Yes.
Yes. Hi, Danny.
Hello, Juliet. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're the founder of Good Energy, which is a tremendous local success story, national, obviously big national business, but you're Chippenham, I think.
We are Chippenham indeed, Danny. I grew up near Cairn, actually.
Okay. Neither of us are in the right constituency, but never mind.
Oh, I'm really sorry. Apologies.
Over to you.
Hi, Danny. Thank you very much for this morning. And it's great to hear a lot of the other speakers. as you said, good energy, I set good energy up 20 years ago to really try and transform the energy market, looking at renewables, big nice solar park behind me, and loved hearing what was being talked about this morning. The big idea, so obviously our big idea for years has been about renewable energy. But going forward now, we've got to nearly, we're closing in on 50% of our electricity should be coming from renewables. There's obviously quite a lot of more work to do in that. There's a lot of heat that still needs to be done, and transport's at the starting gates of kind of going zero carbon. But I think a lot of the things that were being talked about, our view is that we now need to convince the everyman that this is the right way forward. And there were some of the pieces that Joe was touching on education. There were some of the pieces that were being touched on earlier about how are we going to convince the hearts and minds of people? Because I think government regulation is really important, but unless people believe in a government regulation, it won't be allowed to happen. So our big idea is that we have just launched that we want a future board. We've always had this concept that we have 4 stakeholders. One is our customers, one is our people, one is our shareholders, and the 4th one is what we call future holders. They are the people in the future who hold the future. And so we've kind of put our money where our mouths is, in that we're going to appoint a good future board, which is made up of secondary school age students. We're working with eco schools to recruit that board. We've had nearly 1,000 applications across the UK. And we're going to appoint 6 board people, children, who are going to attend our AGM. They're going to feed back and come to some of our board meetings. So our board will have to listen to them. And they're going to be encouraged to interact with the company on an ongoing basis. In exchange for that, sort of what we're hoping to do is to make sure that we provide them with the skills and capability if they want to talk wider and become advocates, like the brilliant Joe that we talked to earlier, and really start to listen to the next generation. Because I think I was invited to a lunch by somebody who was a great environmentalist who was trying to bring the oil companies closer to the renewables industry. And they invited an oil industry exec and his wife. And his wife turned around to the younger members around the table and said, "We've made a mess of it. It's going to be your job to sort it out." And I don't think that's okay. I don't think it's okay for businesses to still sit back and continue to act in a way that climate change isn't important. They need to be held to account. And our view is by appointing this type of board, you are being held to account by future generations. And interestingly, we've already been contacted by one of the big energy companies who are really interested in doing something similar. So we hope that this idea will catch on and be something that we will be able to showcase so that people can see that. And we've had some brilliant applications. I'll just read a couple of them. I'm not afraid to tell people my ideas. I'm also not afraid to give them my opinion. I will point out where I think someone is wrong. And that is really, for me, I think the benefit is we avoid groupthink in the future. We future-proof our businesses, and we are going to be more relevant to the next generation of both customers and employees. So our vision is that we need to, so if companies can come forward, listen to younger customers, listen to younger employees, encouraging teams to think about their children and grandchildren, appoint a youth ambassador and work with schools. But this is our way of really bringing that in and making it really relevant to the business.
Julia, thank you very much indeed. I've launched the poll there about how different people's organisations hear the voices of young people. Someone's challenged you in the chat about, isn't this just greenwash? Isn't this just a way of giving organisations something to put in their annual report that they have this board? Likewise, the government itself, if it did it, how will the voices of young people actually translate into decision making?
Well, I think this is the point. This is not just about us listening to them. It's also about us giving them the tools to understand how businesses work. I mean, I don't know about you when you were at school, that businesses seem to be sort of this mythical entity that nobody really understood what they did. And I think actually by educating a group of younger people to really understand how business works and what their influencing skills can be, I think is really important. Giving them communication skills so that they can go out and talk to people about it, I think is really important. And I mean, in terms of greenwashing, it comes down to greenwashing is all about you say something, but you don't do anything. So that's going to come down to how we actually work with the younger people, the ideas that we come out with. And they are going to be the ones who can call us out if we don't listen to them. So I think that is the point. And obviously by going out, we sort of got a big publicity platform off the back of it that will make sure that we are held to account by those children.
Okay, Juliet, thank you very much indeed. You can see the poll result there that most people hear about from young people who in the organisation itself, also their children and grandchildren, which is very interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today, and we will stay in touch. Okay. Right, next up is Graham Martin, one of my most frequent correspondents on behalf of Sustainable Devices, and has helped me understand a lot about these questions over the last year. So very, very good to be able to have you with us today, Graham, and over to you.
Okay, can you see my screen? Because
No, we can see the Parthenon or something like that.
Ah, right.
And yourself, of course.
Okay, good afternoon and thank you, Danny. I'll launch straight in. At the Devices Area Board in January 20, there was an agenda item on Wiltshire Council's actions to tackle the climate emergency they declared the previous year. For about 10 minutes, the council explained a target for the county to become carbon neutral by 2030 and their plans to cut their own emissions. But those are only a tiny percentage of the overall county emissions, and there were no plans for the others. There were 6 local community groups lined up to give a brief on what they were going to do, but much to their frustration, they were timed out. I was struck by a number of things. This did not feel like climate change being treated as an emergency. The town wasn't mobilising, there were no blue flashing lights. Wiltshire Council can control the emissions for their own estate and fleet, but they have few direct levers to pull over the majority of emissions, although they can lead and provide influence. Reducing these emissions is complex and contentious and requires significant change. And the 6 groups, of which there's only a fraction of the number of groups around Wiltshire, are a sort of alphabet soup of environment groups, all of whom are dedicated but uncoordinated, and they're all shouting their message at the local authorities. My puzzlement and frustration has led me to start studying a master's in sustainability and behaviour change. The clue will be later. So we have the emergency, COVID, but that's not all we face. And I think framing the discourse around climate emergency distracts from the range and scale of challenges we face in the future. These will have a far greater impact than COVID, but will creep up over time in an insidious way and unnoticed. For a small market town in Wiltshire, framing the debate around warmer summers, who doesn't want that? And I know Emma showed how warm we will become, and wetter winters, well, we're on the ill and not prone to flooding, has little impact on the man in the street. According to a YouGov survey, the majority of people now accept that climate change is caused by humans and is happening. However, it's a misconception to think that that acceptance will translate automatically into pro-environmental action, such as giving up car travel. The impacts of climate change are ill-defined and distant, with most people having enough trouble managing and navigating their way through the complexities of daily life. Plus, shouting a doom and gloom at people frequently has the opposite effect to that which they intend. We need to prepare for the future, and it will be better, but in a different way. So we need to frame the debate in terms of preparing for the future. As we've heard from Joe and Danny, the response to the COVID emergency from Devices was really quite spectacular. Within the first few days of lockdown, an alliance of Wiltshire Council, Town Council and the churches mustered over 300 volunteers. Indie devices emerged to support local businesses, and sustainable devices, despite the lockdown, started up a cycle-friendly devices project to capitalise on the uptake in cycling. So how do we sustain this community spirit? Well, the key is the verb sustain. Sustainability is the intersection of economic, business, environment, and social. And what we've got to remember is that sustainability also is for our children. The idea of a sustainability alliance started to form after that area board last January. One of the lessons from Love Devices is the combination of the councils and the churches awarded themselves agency to act, but that was for a very specific cause. Wiltshire Council and Devizes Town Council have limits on their authority, but are well placed to influence and lead. Under the auspices of Devizes Town Council, a Sustainability Alliance has been assembled. At its core will be the Town Council, Indie, Love and Sustainable Devices, but with other groups also being invited. We want engagement with Wiltshire Council, but it needs to be in a more structured and meaningful way than quick debates at the area board. For example, Devizes could have its own set of carbon neutral targets, which the Alliance mobilises the community. The Alliance has been formed to prepare for a sustainable future. It's early days with Town Council just to call the first plenary session, but there are bilateral actions going on between groups. If the Alliance is to be successful, it must have agency to tackle the contentious measures that will be needed and that can find community-based solutions. It must frame the challenges in such a way it's seen positively by the community and that we're preparing for the future. And it looks for opportunities that have been presented, the changes in work pattern. The changes in work pattern will be created by AI and robotics, and it must be a change maker. The ambition is to mobilise the whole community through the Alliance, but it's an experiment and it will be an evolutionary approach. We are tackling multiple challenges and opportunities ahead, but this has to happen at all levels: individual, household, community, county and national. So what we're embarking on in Devizes, the Sustainability Alliance, cannot be done in isolation, but it does offer a way of more cohesive action in which the community can interact with local government. It does not need support in terms of warm, encouraging words. So Danny, I've written to you asking if under the banner of your Levelling Up paper, perhaps we can operate as a pilot, or you can find us a bit of professional startup facilitation. The success of Love Devices COVID support group is because it had agency from Wiltshire and town councils. So Wiltshire Council, I'll particularly address Richard, we need to be able to engage in a meaningful way so we can work out how to work together. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. Well, as you say, it's an absolutely inspirational story of what happened in Devizes last year and the strength of the sort of institutional life of the place, with the really good, committed, engaged town council, and then all these civil society initiatives like Indie Devizes and Love Devices and yourselves. We have the sort of social foundations for this kind of collective action. So I think I'm very keen to see if I can help. There's the results of your poll, which is calling for leadership, and obviously stressing community leadership as we've been, I think is a very important theme. Great. I think Judy Rose just said, well said. I'm not sure who said she was saying it to me, which she's never done before, or to you, Graham, but I think well said to you. Thank you very, very, very much for your time today. Right, 2 more to go, I think. Yes, Gemma Batten is in Kenya and not on video in order to preserve broadband capacity, but she's got some videos and we're going to operate them from the office. So I hope you can hear us, Gemma. We can't hear you yet, but over to you. You need to come off mute.
Sorry, I got dropped and I had to rejoin super quickly.
Well, we
okay.
Ram.
Can you see my screen is the next question.
Yes.
You can. Awesome. Yeah. Excellent. Right. Okay. So we've heard already from a couple of speakers how farmers are, considered to be part of the climate change problem. So what I'd like to talk about is just how we might engage farmers to actually be the solution as well, or more. Okay. A bit of background about myself. I'm a farm environment advisor. I've spent the last rather too many years for my liking, advising farmers and landowners on how to plan, fund and deliver landscape and conservation management on their farms. I also have a lot of organisations that I work for, so things like DEFRA and AONBs and all sorts of other people. And I've spent a lot of time trying to encourage farmers to become engaged with ideas, plans, initiatives that have been thought up by these kind of people. And a couple of, about 10 years ago now, a report came out saying that despite all of that effort, so effort of organisations to engage farmers, governments to incentivise farmers to deliver on their ground, we were still losing habitats and species, and the situation required a kind of step change in the way that we deliver nature conservation. And so that's when my bright idea happened, really. So at the time, I thought, right, okay, well, rather than telling farmers what they ought to do, let's turn the whole thing on its head and ask farmers what they think they ought to be doing, what their targets are, what their priorities are, and trust them to deliver landscape scale conservation. Now, as I say, this was largely kind of inspired by nature conservation, but I think you'll see that we kind of broadened that remit quite considerably, and just so at the time, this kind of led to the birth of what's now the Marlborough Downs Nature Enhancement Partnership, which is led by the farmers of the Marlborough Downs, local farmers, and we work in partnership with lots of different stakeholders, from the local naturalist to the local authority, school kids, driving for the disabled, you can see there, research institutes, all sorts of, just everybody. We're very welcoming. Transition Marlborough, for example, who I know are on the call. Anyway, so we got together, we put together our ideas, and came up with lots of landscape scale projects. And this is just a few of them, and I'm going to gallop through all of this because I know that we'll share slides later. Inspired by that, and kind of looking at the sort of achievements that we had on the Marlborough Downs, a few more groups got together, supported by GWCT. And then a few more, and a few more, and a few more. And as you can see from this map, I'm not sure how up to date this is, but farmer-led conservation groups are now scattered across the whole country, into Wales, into Scotland. And I know, Danny, you mentioned Africa earlier, and I'm actually currently in Kenya, where part of what I'm doing is trying to encourage farmer groups here in Kenya to look at how they might farm more efficiently, more economically, and more environmentally. So, it's a universal model. What have we achieved? Well, I'm just going to gallop through some of the achievements of some of our local Wiltshire groups. So this is the Martin Down Farmer Cluster, who've been creating habitat and have recorded, quite significant species improvements in their local species, target species. Wiley Valley farmers are looking at focusing on various things such as soil management. Obviously, soil is a big carbon sink. Nitrate applications, so looking at inputs and water quality. Juniper, so declining species, protected species, and pollinator habitat again. So pollinator is a big theme. The Nada Valley group have been planting disease-resistant elms, which obviously not only soak up the carbon anyway, but are also an important food plant for this rare white letter hair streak butterfly. They've also created 1,000 hectares, farmers in that area have created 1,000 hectares of farmland bird habitat, which supports these kind of rare species, yellowhammer tree sparrow, yellow wagtail, corn bunting tree sparrow, all of which are declining nationally, but locally, where farmers are providing habitat and year-round food, they are kind of holding their own much better. So you can see that these kind of groups have can have a big impact. As I say, gallop through lots of information on the web if you're interested. But if you kind of take the achievements that I've just I've just shown you, just from 3 or 4 groups, and multiply that by the number of dots you saw on that map earlier, you can see how, given the right resources and the right support, private sector, in this case farmers, can deliver significant public benefits, in this case a better environment, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water quality, in terms of soil health, and all, you know, wrapped up in the climate change debate. I'm galloping, sorry. I'm just aware that we've got little time. So in terms of the future, the government are about to launch a new environmental land management scheme, which will replace all payments made to farmers and land managers. So that's environmental and direct payments. They want public money, public resources to pay for public goods, and they're aiming to deliver a more flexible choice, a more flexible scheme. There are 3 tiers to the scheme, and the one that I want to concentrate on here is landscape recovery. Traditionally, landscape recovery has been focused in protected landscapes, areas protected, national parks, AONBs. But as you can see, that leaves quite a lot of, I was going to say white space, but in this case, it's kind of cream space. And you know, that space is farmland. We've heard already that farmland covers 80%. Well, actually, it's probably more, because a significant amount of this natural habitat will be shaped by agriculture. So things like moorland, heathland, upland. So it's really, really, really essential, vital, important that we engage farmers. And experience has shown us that if we just tell farmers what to do, like anybody, you know, they're kind of engaged, but not necessarily fully. The way to really engage farmers is to give them ownership of their projects, let them come together and put groups together, design their own structure, their own agenda, their own targets, obviously within the, you know, within the context of national government, local, regional targets. But as soon as farmers own those targets, own that project, they invest in it, they've invested in it, they've, you know, they committed to it, they take pride in those achievements, and this is, you know, this then becomes a sustainable thing. As I say, the Marlborough Downs group's been going for 10 years now, still going strong. Got a group on Salisbury Plain. Be really interested to speak to General Nuji about how that's going and how we can use Salisbury Plain better. But yeah, I think that's probably me. I hope I've explained myself.
We've put the poll up that you the way you phrased it. Can we trust the private sector to deliver sustainable solutions? And you know, as you explained, by which you meant farmers as private business people. But can you see the share it, Rebecca? There we go. So most people do not have faith in the private sector to deliver sustainable solutions, but your argument is that if we empower farmers more, they will do so. I suppose my question, quick answer please, is to what extent it's actually just incentives that government can introduce and indeed consumer pressure that makes farmers do this, or is your suggestion literally empowering them will cause them to channel their own natural desire to see a greener planet and make them do the right thing without strong incentives or external pressure?
I think it's a combination of all 3, but I think there's very strong evidence from, you know, from the groups that are functioning at the moment that actually incentivized, you know, financial incentives do not deliver to any extent as much as motivated. You know, people who are self-motivated, and most of these groups are self-motivated, and they're delivering way over and above what you know, what previously
that's the thing
was tried to achieve by just financial incentives.
And I'm hugely encouraged and inspired by what's happening on the Marlborough Downs. So thank you very much indeed, Gemma. And I sympathise with people in the chat who are saying the questions are too simple, but that's the problem with questions, binary choices. But obviously it's usually and, but, if, rather than just these straight choices. But anyway, thank you for everybody for engaging with the polls. Thank you, Gemma, for contributing from Kenya. And on our last speaker before we go on to the final part of this morning's session, which is the PM's representative, my colleague, we're going to hear from Evangeline Rowe, who is with us. Evangeline, you're very welcome. From the Wiltshire Alliance Youth Group. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, good morning. My name is Evangeline. I'm an environmental science student at Bournemouth University, climate activist and member of Wiltshire Climate Alliance. And today I want to talk to you about a circular economy and why this is such an important model to try and implement into our society in response to the climate catastrophe. Our planet has finite resources, yet our consumption and economy is linear. At the start of the line, we exploit the environment, and at the end of the line, we pollute the environment. Following this path is having detrimental effects on our planet and the depletion of resources we so desperately need to survive. A circular economy is a conscious economic system aimed at eliminating waste and the continual use of resources. Moving from a line to a circle can help preserve natural resources and environments, as well as reduce our waste. A circular economy is not a new idea. The first expression of this idea was as early as 1966 by Kenneth Boulding. In an ideal circular world, we would buy products in minimal packaging, if any. That packaging would be reusable, if not recyclable. Beer and wine taps, soft drinks and milk refills, bulk food sections and loose produce are all becoming much more common in environmentally conscious stores. Materials such as glass, stainless steel and aluminium that can be reused and recycled in a closed loop would be preferred. Deposit and return schemes have proved successful elsewhere, as well as simply educating the public on what they can and can't recycle through their council curbside recycling. Both companies and individuals must be held accountable for their waste, and a reward scheme for minimal to no waste could help encourage this. A deposit reward scheme would reward individuals for recycling more with discounts or cash. Making recycling and reuse facilities accessible to the masses is of the utmost importance. Denmark has one of the world's best deposit and return schemes for bottles and cans with more than 3,000 locations. Many glass bottles are also simply washed out rather than melted down, which saves a lot of energy in the recycling process. By also having an option to use your own container when we are reusing what's already in circulation rather than encouraging the production of more products. The most well-known British example of this is the milkman. Like most, I grew up with a milkman, and now the milkman even sells oat milk, which is currently the most sustainable alternative to dairy. How can you help create a circular economy? By ensuring that packaging can be reused and that the cost of the product reflects their ecological footprint. This is less of a carbon tax and more of a reflection of time, energy, transport, thus incentivizing companies and individuals to make more sustainable choices in their everyday lives. By giving companies financial incentives to prioritize reusables, local, seasonal foods and products, this can have a huge impact on consumer choices and thus the impact our consumption has on the environment. Consumer habits must change and we all have a part to play. Voting with your money is a wonderful way to start, but we also need to change how we view and deal with our waste as a society. You cannot be perfectly zero waste in a world that encourages wastefulness. In July 2020, the UK government published the Circular Economy Package Policy Statement, which, quote, introduces a revised legislative framework identifying steps for the reduction of waste and establishing an ambitious and credible long-term path for waste management and recycling. Whilst this is a great start for the bulk, but the bulk of the 2020 measures are relatively small technical changes, which we simply don't have time for. I would like to stress that whilst the impacts of climate change may seem far away for us here in the UK, for the most impoverished communities around the world and those who have contributed least, I might add, climate change is already knocking at their door, threatening their homes, livelihoods and families. It is our responsibility to take a step forward towards a more sustainable future before we get left behind. As a young person and environmental science student, the climate crisis terrifies me. I'm doing as much as I can in my individual life and feel that my efforts are being held back by the wasteful nature of the economy I live within. Please do all that you can do and help create a circular world so that we can break the cycle of extraction and pollution and live with nature rather than against it. For me, my children and my grandchildren, this is of the utmost importance. Thank you.
Evangeline, thank you very much indeed. That's a very powerful call to arms. Just tell us more about how you think, or rather than just, so easy to say what we're doing wrong. I mean, where are the signs of hope you see towards a more circular economy? Whether it's by government, any government around the world, or businesses, or do you just see it in terms of the increasing popular support for more sustainable economy?
Yeah, I think everyone kind of needs to contribute, individuals, companies on their own, and governments. I feel like there needs to be there needs to be initiatives in place for local councils, government in general, to try and get people to try and work towards this more circular economy, rather than kind of it relying on all of our kind of consumer choices. It does, I think, a lot of legislation can be put in place to help create this, and then this will then reflect, you know, if the UK start doing it, a lot of Europe is already having some of these things, like in Denmark. So it would be great if we could, yeah, move forward.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. There's the result of your poll. Do you know, have you got an answer to the question yourself about what percentage?
Yeah, it's 8.6%.
Okay.
So not high enough.
No, where's that from? What's your
That's from the Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum.
Okay, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. You didn't give that as a choice, so no one can get it right. But
I know, I'm sorry. I had a bit of a funny thing with the panel, but with the polls, but yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Thanks, Evangeline. Right. So we need Andrew Griffiths on the screen, please. Andrew is my colleague, MP for Arundel, and recently appointed by the Prime Minister to be his envoy to the business community for the net zero target. I think I've got that right, Andrew. What we're going to do is let Andrew just talk, I hope just for a minute or two, just setting out what his role is and what he sees as the government's doing to support businesses in achieving net zero. But we're then going to go into Q&A, and we're going to use the Q&A function. So that should be at the bottom of all your screens. And the way it works is you just put in a question, and then I believe there's the opportunity to upvote, which means if you give it a thumbs up, you can promote that question, and I will ask Andrew the questions that appear at the top. So the ones which get the most votes will get answered. I hope we can make this work, Andrew. But let's see. So people do feel free to start chucking in questions for Andrew, and I'll let you speak, Andrew. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good. It's now good afternoon, everybody. And look, Danny, it's a great pleasure to speak to the Wiltshire Climate Summit today. Colleagues who are here with us should know that you are one of the most listened to members of Parliament. Far too many members of Parliament tend to just talk all the time. I can assure you, when Danny speaks in Parliament, everybody's quiet and listens. So it's really a pleasure to come and join you. You can see from my background today, slightly garish colour choice, but this is the year of the 26th UN Climate Summit. So it's incredibly topical that we're talking about climate action today. We've got a unique, I mean, unique is an often overstated word, but I do genuinely think that with the combination of the G7 being led by the UK, the G20 by the UK and Italy, the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow on the 1st of November, and then immediately afterwards the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, that we have a real chance collectively working together to make a real difference. That is augmented by the recent election of President Biden in the United States, who's immediately marched the US back into the Paris climate change talks, but also the geopolitical forces that mean that China, for the first time, has set a 2060 target for their emissions to reach zero as well. So I do think we're witnessing this moment in time, no doubt starting in Wiltshire today, Danny, and then cascading up until we reach Glasgow in November, when we have this chance, unique chance, to take action on climate. I always, I love the quote from John F. Kennedy. I don't know if you remember, but you know, when he set that bold and audacious target about going to the moon, and he said, "We don't do this because it is easy. We do this because it is hard." And it is hard. I mean, what we're trying to do as a planet is take 2,000 years of human progress that we can't throw away, progress that has seen us leave caves and pick up coal on the foreshore, which was the first form of carbon that we really used, create people's life expectancy, their health, their standard of living, and lift billions of people in the world out of poverty. And what we're trying to do is build on that 2,000 years of human process and endeavor. And in the space of just 20 or 30 years, a handful of decades, to decarbonize the world economy. And you know what? I think we can do it. But I think we can do it because of the grand problem-solving force of businesses. And we heard from Gemma earlier about exactly how she's harnessing that as a farmer, as a steward of the land. So I think I'm firmly on the side, and I saw the poll earlier, I think after Graham spoke, but I'm firmly on the side that we have to engage with business. Business is a great problem-solving force, and I see every day businesses who are coming forward, making their own commitments to net zero. That's my role as the UK's business champion, is to work with businesses to take them on that journey to net zero, encourage them to move as quickly as possible, and many are doing great work in this space. And then we can look ahead at the opportunities for us, the opportunities to build new businesses, to, as we have, create one of the most sustainable countries on the planet in terms of generating power from wind, to create new businesses in hydrogen, where every day people are coming forward with more non-carbon emission based ways of living their homes, of heating, of transporting themselves and their family, of using new methods in agriculture, of completing that circle, the other 92% of the circular economy, and to build, I'm sure, something of great interest to residents of Wiltshire, to build place-based economies, where we think about the consequences of all of our actions and sometimes make sure that we're living in sustainable communities where we're able to satisfy more of our needs locally. So I'll stop there, Danny, but I just wanted to set the scene and make sure that everybody can feel involved in this journey, whether you're a voluntary group or a business or an individual consumer. And there's lots of things you can do.
Brilliant, Andrew, thank you very much. Okay, there's a bunch of questions have arrived and people have been upvoting them. The most popular question is going to bring you down to earth with a bump. Andrew, it's the coal mine in Cumbria. Has the government stumbled at the first hurdle?
No, the government set an incredibly ambitious target. The government's target is to reduce our nationally determined contributions by 68% by 2030. Okay, that is a leading ambition in the world. We were the first country to bake net zero into law, and that progress will not be universally linear. So the government has just recently created the largest seabed auction that it's ever had. The wind farm capacity in the UK is going to grow fivefold over the next 2 decades. So it's very easy. Look, I don't want to be too pointed, but it's super easy to virtue signal in this space. And we've all got an individual decision we can make. You know, we can engage with this as a problem to be solved, and we can get down and slice it piece by piece, or we can stand on the sidelines. And I'm very critical of that. And you can just polish your halo and say, it doesn't matter that someone's doing 99% things in the right direction. I'm going to dwell on the 1%. And I'm very comfortable with the choices the government are making. Everyone's got to make their own decision as to where they sit on that spectrum. But this is really about marshalling our collective force for solving the problem. And by the way, the UK's biggest contribution to this is going to be in that leadership role. You know, we all know that essentially we could contribute less than 2% of global emissions ourselves. But if we can come up with new technologies, things like fusion energy are being grown in UK labs right now. And so you've got to look at how we make the contribution in the round.
Okay. Andrew, thank you. Let's move on to the next question. What role do you see a fair carbon tax playing in getting to net zero?
Oh, I think a really good role, actually. I mean, this is me speaking personally. This is an evolving area of policy, but clearly we've got to put a price on carbon. Now, sometimes that price can be indirectly through something like a plastic bags tax that is capturing the value of that externality. But as we put up the opportunity of carbon, we will tilt the world in favor of solutions that lower the overall carbon emissions. So I can see a real role for the price of carbon. How you do that, whether it's via a tax or a price mechanism, we'll have to see how that evolves over time.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Okay. Right. Question about fuel poverty, incentivizing individuals rather than big businesses to decarbonize. And I don't know if you caught the presentation earlier about the carbon fee and dividend proposal, the climate income, carbon income scheme that was being proposed by a group in Wiltshire. What do you think about that idea?
I didn't capture that. I'm sorry, Danny. I missed that. I mean, we've clearly got to look out along the journey for things like fuel poverty. One of the things that I think is a great policy, I'd like us to do much more quickly, are things like the Green Homes Grant. Right, that is very progressive. It's a fixed grant to individuals, so it captures very much people at the lower end of the income spectrum, and it gives them the tools to equip their home, because often that is the housing stock that needs the most investment the quickest. And so the government absolutely has a role to play. As you know, the government's putting £12 billion on the table to try and ease the transition to a low carbon economy. So if you follow up with me, Danny, I'll be love to hear more about that particular proposal.
Okay, I think that would be helpful for us to have that conversation. Let's do that. Richard and Laura and others, let's have that conversation with Andrew. Thank you. What incentives do you think will be most important to drive climate action by businesses? I mean, what can government do to really incentivize businesses to do the right thing?
Carrot and stick. I mean, first of all, as you know, it is now the law of the land that overall the UK will be net zero by 2050. So that's a pretty big stick, if you like. And there are other sticks, such as moving forward the switch off date for the internal combustion engine, which this government has brought forward to 2030 for fully internal combustion engine vehicles. And in other domains, you'll see similar initiatives coming forward. One of the more, I think this will sound really dull, okay, but one of the most profound interventions that the government has made with business is on mandatory carbon disclosure. So every business will have to disclose above a certain level, but that's a very large number. Every business will have to come forward to dig deep into its supply chain to find where it is consuming carbon. It will have to disclose that. So all of us will have that information in the public domain to make smarter decisions. And then you're seeing global investors already start to say, well, if a business isn't really taking sharp enough action to reduce its carbon, it's not really a sustainable place for us to invest. And so there's a vast amount of global investment capital now that's sorting out the sheep from the goats and saying only those businesses that are taking action are the sort of businesses that we're going to participate in. And then, of course, we have the ability as climate activists to make smart choices as consumers, but having been given that information. So I really think that's a very substantial initiative. It'll be tough for businesses to comply, and so it's definitely a sanction that they have to come forward and do this, and that's backed up by the law to make them do it.
Okay, Andrew, thank you. Question from Nick Morris. What will government do to encourage the installation of solar panels or tiles on all new homes in the UK?
I'd watch this space, because the government's already talking about targets for net zero, for new homes to be net zero in use. And then beyond that, there'll be a moment in time as the technology progresses to make them net zero in construction. I was talking to a house builder yesterday who's using a lot more wood rather than concrete and steel, because those are hard to abate materials. And as you know, the government's got a pretty big program with the Green Homes Grant that's just getting going, which will deal with retrofitting the large part of the housing stock. So I think you'll quite quickly get to a world where all new housing stock is net zero compatible. We then need to deal with, frankly, the bigger issue of the existing housing stock. And that's going to take money and time and a whole new skills economy. You know, if anyone young, there's a young person on the call, the place to be is a new environmentally sustainable retrofitter of homes, because we just simply can't get enough people at the moment who can install this insulation or air or ground source heat pumps. There's going to be a much more sustainable way to live going forward.
One way of getting them might be to improve the take-up of the Green Homes grant. Are you involved in conversations about how to improve the rollout of that? We heard earlier from the Deputy Leader of Wiltshire Council about the difficulty of actually accessing some of these funds that central government commits.
Yeah, there's been, I mean, look, I mean, to be balanced, I mean, some of the problems are of success. Okay, so I mean, it's always super easy to sort of whack the government. I mean, and you know, I'm sure there's a constituency that just like doing that generally. Part of the issue here is the government's made some big targets. It's generated a lot of excitement and interest in this space, as have consumers, as have voluntary groups. This government has then come along, put its money where its mouth is, spun up a plan very quickly, and it hasn't executed it perfectly, right? I mean, self-evidently. What do you do with that, right? Do you just put snippy comments in comments bars, or do you engage and say, well, look, these aspects are going well, right? We're driving demand. We are starting to see a skills base emerge, not quickly enough, but we're starting to see a skills base emerge. We're in the middle of a pandemic, which has inhibited the ability of installers to get out there and install it. And the government has already committed to roll that program forward into 2022. So I can speak personally and say, I think this is an excellent program that hasn't been as brilliantly executed so far as we would like it to be. You know, let's look at this in the long term. I hope that this program runs for 5, 10, 15 years. I hope it makes a really significant difference in one of the hardest domains, because, you know, we can switch our cars, we can cycle more, we can look at our food supply chains. You know, actually changing the whole housing stock of the UK is exactly the sort of big program that government should be involved in.
Okay, great. Well, I hope you'll support the cause to retain that and extend that grant. That's great that you're so supportive of it.
Absolutely.
Right, I've got a question for you won't be able to answer about Wiltshire's recycled waste disposal. So I'm going to let you off that question. I'm sure you can answer for Sussex. I'm afraid you've had another question. There was a lot of support about the coal mine, and your point earlier about, you know, we're trying to lead by example on coal. And it's true. You know, we're effectively eliminating domestic coal use.
Yeah.
And we want the world to do so. How does it? I mean, I can understand the arguments about, you made the point about we can't proceed exactly on all fronts simultaneously, but if we're actually, you know, trying to get the world to come off coal, just politically and diplomatically, how does it tally for us to be opening a new coal mine? What do we say at COP about when developing countries challenge us on this?
Well, I hope we expose them to the facts of what we're doing. You know, this year will be the year at which the UK ceases to burn coal to generate energy, right? I mean, we're spinning up, I think, as fast as possible, new forms of energy generation. So if anyone on this call's got any ideas as to how this government could be moving faster, right? We just last week had the seabed auction. Okay, the Scottish government that we don't run pulled their auction, so they've now delayed that. But the English government is barreling ahead. The Dogger Bank will be the largest single wind farm in Europe. We've got to have the steel, right? If you know, you don't build a wind turbine, you know, that's going to support 200-meter blades and float in some of the roughest parts of the North Sea without steel. Okay, so you build the blades from laminate and wood, and you build the uprights from steel. The mine in question, one of its uses, I suspect not the only use to be clear, but one of its uses is precisely to make the sort of steel that we use in the shafts of wind farms. Okay, so it's a bit more nuanced than I would like, and probably you would like, Danny, and probably quite a lot of people listening would like. But every single day, you know, we are reducing our carbon and we are progressing towards the world that we all want to create.
Andrew, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you one last question. We're out of time, but this is an important one for a lot of people. What do you see as the role of SMEs in your role as Net Zero Envoy? Are you just talking to the FTSE 100?
Absolutely not. No, there's a fantastic role for SMEs. SMEs are the base of the business pyramid. They themselves make up over 50% of all emissions from business. And I'm very passionate about what we're going to do on that. We'll be coming forward with I actually don't think an SME is a thing. I think I've never met an SME. I've met lots of entrepreneurs. I've met lots of small businesses and some medium-sized businesses, but no one ever thinks of themselves as an SME per se. The government will be coming forward, or I'll be coming forward with a campaign to help them make their own pledges. But there's a huge amount of brilliant resources out there already. The sort of things that small businesses can do are exactly the same thing that we can do as consumers. Look at our supply chain, see if we can source locally wherever possible, source sustainably. If we've got a business premise, look at where we're getting our energy from, look at the lighting, look at the heat insulation, look at our transport, either that, if we've got a van, you can't always change a van overnight. It might be leased if you're a small business, but you can pledge now that the next time that that van comes up for renewal, it will be a low emission vehicle. So it's like the world is replete with really good things that people are doing. I'm coming across a lot of good activity in this space all the time. I'm very keen to give it a platform. So, tell Danny, and Danny can tell me if you've got an idea, if you've got a case study, because what we find is that case studies are the single best way of building confidence and inspiring action with others. And if you'll have me back, I'll be talking more about the really exciting things that small businesses can do in the future.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very much appreciate your time, and it's a very good engagement on the chat. Not everyone's forgiving you for calling them virtue signalers, but never mind. You are very good to have joined us today, and we'll definitely take you up on the invitation to direct suggestions to you around what government policy should be, and also examples of really innovative local businesses which can help make the case for the sort of change that you're driving forward. I really very much appreciate you being with us as
my great pleasure. It is going to be a fantastic year of climate action, so it is super apposite that you're meeting here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, right, we are at the end of the morning session. Thank you all very much. I don't know if you can hear, my dog is whining to be taken out, so I think I can do that. Everyone can go and have lunch. What we're going to do at 2 o'clock, I very much hope that you'll all come back. There's a new link in the email you received earlier, and it's just been posted by Rebecca in the chat. So you need to join that link, not this one that you're on now, because that enables us to have the breakout room function. So we'll see you all back here at 2 o'clock. You'll come into the main room, and then after a minute when everyone's in, we'll give you the option of the 4 rooms you can choose. They're going to be one on food and farming, chaired by Paul Cottington from the NFU, one on the role of business, chaired by Juliet Davenport, who we heard from earlier, one on local action, chaired by Ariane Crampton from Wiltshire Council, and one on COP26 and global policy, chaired by Nick Gibbons of New Resource Partners. So we hope you'll see you all in an hour's time or so, and that will give everyone the opportunity to contribute more directly. Have a nice lunch.